The Texas Longhorns' path to the SEC championship became even clearer this past weekend.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by, Gametime, right? Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. On today's episode, once again, the Longhorns have a clear path to the SEC championship with 4 games remaining on their schedule. In the second segment, it's early, but the 5 keys to beating Florida this Saturday at 11 a.m. And then in the last segment, the Texas men's basketball opener tonight against Ohio State in Vegas. I discussed some key questions about this Texas basketball team going into their first game. All of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Once again, the Texas Longhorns have a clear path, and that path became exponentially, I feel like, clearer to the SEC championship this past weekend. Texas has 4 teams remaining on their schedule: Texas A&M, Arkansas, Kentucky, and Florida. Not in that order, obviously, but those are the 4 schools that Texas will play to close out their regular season schedule. And all 4 of those teams lost on Saturday. Right. So, I don't know who's looking out for Texas, but somebody's looking out for Texas. And so now when you look at their path to the SEC championship, it's very clear. Right. We already knew Texas needed to win out once they lost to Georgia. I don't believe that a 2-loss SEC team will be able to make it into the championship. So Texas has to win out. Right. A&M, Florida, Kentucky, Arkansas. Texas has to find a way to win those 4 games. Then when you look at it, Georgia or LSU, because if Texas wins out, they'll be beating A&M and giving them their second SEC loss now. Georgia or LSU have to drop another conference game, right? And I believe that that is possible because when you look at it, Georgia still has Ole Miss on the road and Tennessee. Those are going to be 2 very tough games. Now, I think Georgia will win both of those, but the way that Ole Miss has played this year outside of the Kentucky game, and the way that they just put up, 500 passing yards and 6 touchdowns on Arkansas and just blitzed them and scored 63 points. There's certainly a scenario in which Ole Miss can finally knock off Georgia. And then Tennessee with that defense and, the way that they can make explosive plays on offense, anything can happen in a game like that. And then when you look at it, LSU still has Alabama on the schedule. I know it's not the Alabama we're used to, but it's still going to be a very tough game. Florida, Vandy, right, who's not laying down for anybody. And then Oklahoma, who, we've seen Oklahoma this year, but maybe they can make something happen. So I do think it's very possible, probably more likely that LSU drops another game. But, Georgia and LSU both have the potential to lose another conference game, and that opens the door. It sets up for Texas to make their way into the SEC championship game. When you look at what transpired over Saturday, right? It's always chaos whenever Texas has a bye week. Remember when Texas had their first bye week and all those top 10 teams lost? I think like 4 top 11 teams lost or something like that. And then once again on Saturday, every team remaining on Texas' schedule lost. But the big one was Texas A&M, right? Texas A&M was riding high, still the only team in conference that had not lost an SEC game. They went into South Carolina. They were favored. But that was a South Carolina environment that a lot of people thought that Texas A&M would slip up in. And boy, did they slip up. They lost 44-20. They were just completely outclassed in that game. It was their homecoming, right? South Carolina has one of the best just game day environments, especially at night. It gets crazy in there. They were ramped up coming off a bye, and they were ready to come in there and win that game, right? And it looked like Texas A&M, who, especially on defense, really had balled all year. It just looked like they did not want to be there. Right. The defense wasn't tackling. They weren't sound. They were just giving up easy opportunities in the passing game. They could not tackle Lenore Sellers to save their life. Rocket Sanders had almost 250 scrimmage yards. They just did whatever they wanted to do offensively and put up 44 points. And then when you have a freshman quarterback in Marcel Reed, there's going to be some growing pains. All right. And they picked the wrong time to have those growing pains, when you're riding high, and have a clear path to the SEC championship game. And then he had an interception and just some bad plays. Of course, they lost Le'Veon Moss, arguably their best player, which affected their running game. There was 2 times in that game where they had like a 4.5 yard or, 4th and 1, and they couldn't get it. Maybe if Le'Veon Moss is in the game, they get that. But nonetheless, you give the ball to South Carolina on a short field. Once again, your defense acts like they don't want to be there, and then South Carolina goes down the field and scores a touchdown. So we know this is Texas A&M, right? Whenever you start to believe in the Aggies, whenever they look like world beaters, whenever you feel like the Aggies can make some type of run, they always have this big, substantial step back. And they did this past Saturday against, South Carolina. Now, I think Texas fans, when you look at that performance, I wouldn't take too much from it, right? We know that environment in the Low Star Showdown is going to be completely different when we play Texas A&M, right? That defense is going to show up and act like they want to be there. They're going to be at home. It's going to be 100,000 people in Kyle Field. The building will be rocking. We will get Texas A&M's best shot. South Carolina did not get Texas A&M's best shot. We will, right? It's going to be tough for them to win now without Le'Veon Moss. But that's going to be a very, very tough game for the Longhorns. But them losing on Saturday opened up or made it a lot easier for Texas to make their way in the SEC championship. Then when you looked at Florida, right? Texas' next opponent coming up this Saturday at 11. Florida's been playing some good ball, right? Coming into the season, Billy Napier was kind of a dead man walking. People were talking about how long it would take for him to get fired. They were kind of doing the 2 quarterback system with Graham Mertz and then the talented true freshman DJ Lagway. And then, Graham Mertz tears his ACL, but we saw some flashes, right? This was a Florida team coming into the Georgia game that had won 3 out of their last 4 games. The only loss was in overtime to Tennessee on the road, right? I don't think that you can just hang your hat over that, right? With Tennessee's been one of the best teams in college football this year. And then when you looked at this Florida team, they were really explosive on offense. This was a team that put up almost 50 points on Kentucky. This was a team that, DJ Lagway especially was really making plays, and he was throwing the ball down the field. I think they said he was completing 63% of his passes, 20-plus yards down the field, broke the freshman record against Sanford. In his his first game, but his first start, the second game of the season for Florida. And then I think in that game against Kentucky, he had like 7 completions for over 200 yards. It was something crazy. I mean, like they were just showing the potential to be really explosive on offense with DJ Lagway. And I think that he was really breathing some life into that program. And then you see the game against Georgia where Georgia's in trouble, albeit the first half. Georgia's in trouble. Georgia's on the ropes. He throws a touchdown, right? They're up. I think either 7-0 or 10-0. Carson Beck is doing the Carson Beck thing he's been doing this year, just throwing interceptions left and right. And then whatever happened on that field, because Florida lost like 4 or 5 starters in that game alone, but DJ Lagway pulls his hammy. They put in the 3rd-string quarterback from Yale, who's just happy to be there. Like literally, they're talking about on the broadcast, he's just happy to be at the University of Florida because he grew up in the area. And then all of a sudden, Florida doesn't have a pulse anymore, right? And so you look at it, this is a Texas kid in DJ Lagway, one of the best quarterbacks, certainly one of the most talented quarterbacks in the country, albeit young. And he could have presented some challenges for this Texas defense on Saturday. Now you're more than likely going to be going against a 3rd-string quarterback. And we saw what Florida was able to do once he came in, the 3rd-string transfer from Yale. Nothing. Right. And so Texas catches a break because now you don't have to face off against DJ Lagway, that Florida team who, even though you're better than, they were playing some really good ball and could present some challenges on Saturday to Texas. Now it looks like, Texas should be able to beat them by a couple scores. So Texas certainly caught a break there. And you look at Arkansas, right? I think that's going to be a tough game regardless, just on the road, old school rivalry, a team that likes to run the ball. Bobby Petrino can get really creative. Even though it's at 11, it's going to be a lot of hate in the building. It's going to be a tough environment for Texas to win in, certainly, right? But then you look at it, Ole Miss beats them 63-31, right? Comes in there, throws for over 500 yards, 6 touchdowns, just blitzes Arkansas offensively without their number 1 wide receiver in Trey Harris. And then Arkansas, talk about injuries, all these teams were playing, loses their starting quarterback, Taylor Green, in the game, right? And I think that's one of the biggest challenges they could have presented to Texas is that running game with Taylor Green and Jaquindon Jackson and Bobby Petrino dialing it up, right? And I'm not sure the extent of Taylor Green's injury or will he be back by the time that they play Texas. But right now, based on what I've seen, it doesn't look too good, right? So you look at this Arkansas team really exposed on Saturday and lost their starting quarterback, and they have to face off against Texas in a few weeks. And then Kentucky, probably the easiest. I don't want to say easy. It is the SEC. but probably the easiest team left on your schedule. They lost to Tennessee 28-18. To me, this team really just does not present too many challenges to you offensively. And even though they have one of the better defenses in the country, we saw Auburn run for over 300 yards against them. Florida put up over 500 yards of offense. This defense can be had, right? This is not a team that's playing inspired football. So when you look at it, Texas has a clear path to the SEC championship. Win out. Georgia or LSU have to lose a game. And Florida, Kentucky, Arkansas, and A&M all showed big vulnerabilities, big chinks in the armor on Saturday. If Texas is playing Texas Longhorns football, they should be able to end the regular season 11-1 and punch their ticket to the SEC championship game in Atlanta. All right, a quick word from our sponsors. Then we get into the 5 keys to beating that Florida team who has lost their top 2 quarterbacks on the depth chart. All right, today's episode of Locked On Longhorns brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire, but LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process easier and quicker. Over 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. And remember, terms and conditions do apply. All right, the 5 keys to beating the Florida Gators, right? And I know it was a rivalry game against Georgia in Jacksonville. So that's kind of a game you're always going to get up for, similar to Red River. I'm not comparing the rivalries, but even when you look at like an Oklahoma team that, may be down at quarterback or maybe down at some positions, that's a team that's still going to go in there and fight. And that's one thing that I have noticed about this Florida team, right? When, they came in, they started off 1-2, everybody, the way that they got beat by Texas A&M and Miami, and everybody was just talking about Florida was just, maybe going to win 3-4 games this year. They really started to turn it up and play with some intensity, right? Maybe just for pride, maybe for Billy Napier, maybe they like him as a coach. I'm not sure, right? But this was a team that's playing, with some intensity. And I feel like Texas, just kind of like the Dallas Cowboys, I'm a fan of both. Sometimes, unfortunately, they always get every team's best shot, right? And you had potentially a Florida team that was playing a really good game against Georgia, maybe could have even won if DJ Lagway was able to stay healthy. DJ Lagway, a Texas kid coming in with all that talent, this could have been a really tough game for the Texas Longhorns. Now, this is obviously not an opponent that you can just, sleep on or, just kind of dismiss or whatever. But I do think with that DJ Lagway injury, this becomes a completely different game for Florida and Texas. But I still think that you're going to get Florida's best shot. I just don't know if Florida's best shot is enough to beat Texas, even if Texas isn't on their A game. But you don't want to take that for granted. Like I said, you're trying to make it to the SEC championship and, of course, secure your spot in the playoffs. So 5 keys to beating Florida. And it's really just getting back to Texas Longhorns football. The first one is you got to get back to running the ball at a high level. I think the attempts have been there over the last 2 games. You've ran the ball 42 times with your running back. So it's not what we're normally accustomed to, but 42 times, that's 21 times over the last 2 games on average. That's not bad. And they've ran it for 178 yards, 4.2 yards per carry. That is not the standard for the running game at the University of Texas. That is not the standard for the running game in Steve Sarkisian's offense. So we need to get back to not only running the ball at a high clip and running the ball effectively. And the running backs have to be a little bit better, right? Jaden Blue, I know he didn't get a carry in the Georgia game, but Jaden Blue and Trey Wisner have to be a little bit better. But I'm charging this mostly to the offensive line. We've seen, according to Pro Football Focus, I talked about this on my last episode. I know it was a while ago, right? But my last episode on Wednesday last week, that the offensive line, pretty much every offensive lineman outside of Hayden Conner, their run blocking grades have dropped significantly over the last 2 games, right? So Vanderbilt and Georgia have, found a way to neutralize this running game and found a way to win that matchup in the trenches against our offensive line, one that we touted as one of the best in the country. So not only do Trey Wisner and Jaden Blue, right, need to get back to, making those explosive runs. And, we kind of got to get back to dictating the game with our run game on offense. But that starts with the offensive line. The offensive line has to get back to moving people in the trenches and creating those holes for Jaden Blue and Trey Wisner. They haven't done that the last 2 weeks. They have a great opportunity against Florida to do that on Saturday. Second thing is you have to protect the quarterback. Right. Quinn Ewers, we've seen, has been a little bit rattled, right? Especially in the Georgia game, but even at times in Vanderbilt. And it's because he's been under a lot of pressure, right? Over 20 pressures the last 2 games allowed on Quinn Ewers. It makes sense why he hasn't been the same Quinn we saw in the first half of the season, why he has not been as comfortable as we saw before the UTSA injury. Now, some of that is on Quinn, right? He needs to move in the pocket a little bit better, right? Get the ball out of his hands, a little bit quicker and protect his offensive line as well. But when you've been sacked 11 times over the last 2 games, that plays a big role in your comfortability in the pocket, right? Now you're rushed. Now you're seeing ghost. Now your process is sped up and you can't sit back and be the poised Quinn Ewers that we're used to seeing. So obviously he has to be a little bit better. I'm not going to turn this into a, get on Quinn Ewers fest. I know that's been the theme, in Longhorn Nation the last couple of weeks, but that offensive line has to dominate this matchup, not just in the running game, but in terms of pass blocking. They're one of the best pass blocking units in the country. Their pass blocking grades, even over the last couple of weeks, giving up those 11 sacks from Pro Football Focus, have still been pretty solid outside of Cam Williams. He struggled mightily the last 2 weeks at right tackle, but they have to get back to making Quinn Ewers comfortable, right? 11 sacks, regardless of whose fault it is egregious over the last 2 weeks. Protect the quarterback, allow him to make plays down the field, and then open up those running lanes for our running backs. The third thing is Quinn has to protect the ball, right? We've seen him turn the ball over in 4 straight games now, right? UTSA when he went out, then he came back. Oklahoma, Georgia, and Vanderbilt over the last 2 weeks, multiple turnovers. He has turned the ball over in every game he's played this year outside of Michigan, right? And so turnovers have been a problem for Quinn Ewers. It's one of the biggest reasons that Texas is one of the best teams in terms of forcing turnovers in the country, but we only have a +3 turnover margin on the season, right? Because we've turned the ball over 17 times of the other teams, but then we've given the ball up 14 times, right? So Quinn Ewers is turning the ball over entirely too much. I want to see him come into this game against Florida and play a clean football game, right? And we've seen it really kind of just careless turnovers, not getting his feet set, getting the ball tipped at the line. We've seen that a lot from Quinn Ewers, so we can't say it's just coincidence, especially when it happens twice in one game. Want to see him play a clean game, right? Keep the ball in our hands, be efficient with the ball, go down the field, and get scoring drives, right? So he's, like I said, he's turned the ball over in every game he's played this year outside of Michigan. I want him to play a Michigan-esque game against Florida and play clean football. Texas should have a great chance to win if Quinn Ewers can do that. Stop the run on defense, right? The defense has been really great, but one area that you can kind of nitpick necessarily or say that the Texas defense can be better is in the running game, right? They've allowed 5 teams out of the 8 they've played to run for over 100 yards this season. They've allowed the last 2 teams they've played to run for over 100 yards. And in 4 SEC games, 3 out of those 4 teams ran for over 100 yards. Mississippi State, Georgia, and Vanderbilt. The only team that did not run for over 100 yards is one of the teams that did not have a pulse, right? That does not have an offensive pulse in the country, and that's the Oklahoma Sooners, right? So when you look at it, that is one area where Florida, especially with a third-string quarterback, is going to come in and try to control the game. They're going to come in and try to run the ball and then make their third-string quarterback comfortable. So I expect Texas to load up in the box, right? You have the corners to do it and the safeties to do it. Load up in the box, stop that run, and force a third-string quarterback to beat you on the outside. But like I said, 3 out of the last 4 games, especially in the SEC, you've given up over 100 rushing yards. Texas still one of the best defenses in the country. I think still a top 30 run defense in the country, but that is an area of vulnerability, right? Because it allows teams to consistently move the chains, keep the Texas offense off the field, and control time of possession, right? So you want to stop that Florida run game, turn them into a passing offense, it should be a really good day for the Texas Longhorns. And they continue to force turnovers. I think the best thing about this team, the thing that gives me so much hope about the ceiling of this football team in terms of winning an SEC championship or winning a national championship, is the fact that they have forced a turnover in every single game. 17 turnovers in 8 games is just amazing, right? I mean, we remember watching Texas defenses who were getting blown off the field. You know what I mean? Like, forget a turnover. I mean, they just couldn't stop anybody, right? Now, 17 turnovers in 8 games, that is just phenomenal, right? And you're going against a third-string quarterback. I think that you have to find ways to force turnovers in this game as well. So, if you can force Florida into a mistake or two, that just gives you so much more opportunity on offense and just gives you a way bigger opportunity to win this game. Texas shouldn't need a turnover to beat this version of Florida, but it certainly helps. And I think that's the identity of this Texas defense, right? Turn the ball over, get it back to your offense, and help them put points on the board. So those are my 5 keys for Texas beating Florida on Saturday. Once again, it seems like an easier test. It seems like a depleted Florida team. They lost 4 or 5 starters in that Georgia game, including their starting quarterback, who was their second-string quarterback, DJ Lagway. So it's certainly going to be a tough test for Florida coming into DKR, but it's the SEC. You can't take anything for granted, especially the way that Texas has been playing the last 2 weeks. They really need to get back to playing Texas Longhorns football, championship level football, and hopefully we see that on Saturday. Quick word from our sponsors, and it is basketball season. Once again, time is flying. November 4th, the Texas Longhorns play their first basketball game of the season tonight in Vegas against Ohio State. Talk about that next. All right, today's episode of Locked On Longhorns also brought to you by Gametime. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting the tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Hop on Gametime and get you some tickets to see the football team in DKR while you still can, or take advantage of Gametime and get into the Moody Center to see what I think should be one of the best teams in college basketball this season. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Outside of the Gametime Picks, some other features that make Gametime the best ticketing app in the industry. All-in pricing. Toggling this feature shows the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. Seat views. You get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. The lowest pricing guarantee, your Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Gametime ticket coverage. Your purchase, of course, is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime Picks. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. All right, so getting into the Texas basketball team, once again, it's November 4th, so their season opener is tonight against Ohio State. Ohio State is not ranked, but that does not mean it'll be an easy game for the Longhorns, who come into the season number 19 in the preseason poll. I think they're a top 10 team just based on talent, but, it's college basketball. A lot can happen, and I do think the Longhorns are going to have to prove themselves, right? Somewhat of a down year, which is crazy to say in Texas basketball, but they did have the Elite 8 run, after Rodney Terry took over for Chris Beard, in that season. And then you come back last year and you don't make it to the Sweet 16, right? They weren't as talented as they were the year before, but certainly a team that I thought could beat Tennessee and get to the Sweet 16. So a down year based on what you were able to accomplish previously. But now it's year 2 for Rodney Terry, the second full year for Rodney Terry, third year as the coach of the Texas basketball team. This is a really talented roster, right? You brought in one of the best freshmen in the country in Trey Johnson. You brought in a really good transfer class. You brought back 3 key pieces from last year's team, and moving to the SEC, which is not the basketball conference that the Big 12 is, even though you had Alabama go to the Final Four last year. Texas should be able to make noise once again in conference as one of the best teams in college basketball this season. So some of the things I'm looking for just in this game tonight over some of the first few games of the season, while Texas really kind of tries to establish their identity, because you do have so many new pieces on this basketball team, they have to have time to gel, get comfortable with each other and find their roles, right? First thing is, what does freshman phenom Trey Johnson look like in his first game and in his first couple of games, right? Let's not fool ourselves. He's only going to be at Texas for 1 year. Barring something crazy. He's an NBA player that will be playing in the NBA next season, right? And so you have to get him established early. You have to give him the keys and let him be one of the best basketball players in college basketball. So I'll be interested tonight to see how Rodney Terry gets Trey Johnson going and what role he has on this Texas offense. I expect him to be shooting 10 plus shots a game, and I think that should start from day one. Will Tremont Mark be the all SEC level scorer we saw at Arkansas? Now, sometimes it was inconsistent, but this is a guy that can give you 16 to 20 plus points a game if he's locked in. And so you brought him over to be that guy next to Trey Johnson on this basketball team. Will we see that dynamic score at the University of Texas starting tonight? Tremont Mark, once again, preseason all SEC pick. Will he be one of the best scorers in the country? He certainly has that potential. What roles will Jordan Pope and Arthur Kaluma have, right? Arthur Kaluma started at Creighton, then went to Kansas State, just kind of a do-it-all for, right? Defensively, can stretch, shoot the ball, can play inside, really brings a lot of dynamic talents to this basketball team. I don't think he does anything at an elite level, but does a lot of things at a really good level. It could provide a lot of versatility to this team inside and outside. And then Jordan Pope, somewhat of a true point guard coming over from Oregon State. You expect Trey Johnson and Tremont Mark to have the ball in their hands a lot and create their own shot. So what role will Jordan Pope have as the starting point guard for this team? Will we see a lot of screen and roll, a lot of pick and roll? What role will he have offensively? Will he be a pass first point guard? Will he kind of be a spot up shooter? Will he look to get his own scoring going as sort of a big three with Trey Johnson and Tremont Mark? I think that's going to be something we have to look for with him over the first couple of games. And then can Caden Shedrick, who's returning, be a dominant big for this team? When I say dominant, I don't mean like Hunter Dickinson, like 20 and 10 a night, or Zach Edey or anything like that. But can he be a dominant presence inside in terms of rebounding and defensively? And can you go to him inside the paint for maybe 8 to 10 points a game to take some pressure off of your outside scoring and kind of force the defense to come down and double team and maybe open up some shots on the outside, because he is a very good passer at that center position. And we really don't have a true big behind him, right? We really don't have a true center that I think can come in and impact the game behind him. So can Caden Shedrick in year 2 with this Texas team be a dominant presence inside? Once again, not Zach Edey, player of the year candidate, but can he force defenses to account for him inside, which will open up more for our guards and our outstanding players on the outside. Very excited to see this Texas basketball team this season. So glad we're in season, even though talk is around football. I think Rodney Terry can take this basketball team far in the tournament this year. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Plenty of Texas, Florida coverage all week as Texas gets back into SEC play. Those bye weeks kill me, man, especially 2 this year. Like, come on, man. We all want to see this team play. Hug them. Peace.